Hello, hello, hello. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm ever so sorry about the delay. I think it might be something about trying to connect our video call over to China with the VPNs getting in the way of it. So I think there was just a little bit of interruption on there going across onto YouTube. Although we had the video up there, it didn't seem to want to play. But I can see a lot of people now joining, which is fantastic. So I'm just going to disable our waiting room so those who want to join can come in. Again, if you just missed that, apologies for the delay. This is actually probably quite interestingly a little bit of a China problem that you might come across with VPN. If you're trying to stream videos yourself over VPNs, you might find yourself in a little bit of bother in terms of getting a buffering speed to go very quickly. But thank you very much, those of you who've been able to join us. We are joined today by Joe, who is a teacher who's been working out in Foshan in the south of China for quite some years now. We're going to have a bit more of a kind of discussion before opening things up to any questions that you guys might have. If you have any questions along the way, please do feel free to pop anything in the chat box, but we'll open this up to any live discussions that anyone might want to ask at the end as well. So Joe, would you just mind introducing yourself, letting us know a little bit about you, your background, and your experience in China so far?
Sure. Okay, so my name is Joe. I'm from Ireland. I studied English and geography in university a very long time ago. I came to China in 2015, so I've been here for 5 years. It was 5 years last Thursday, actually. And the whole time I've been in Foshan City, which is near Guangzhou in the south of China, about an hour from Hong Kong, is how I tell people at home, so they kind of get it. And I work in a kindergarten, so I've been in the same kindergarten for 5 years, the same place for 5 years. So, I mean, obviously I enjoy it, right?
Fantastic. And can you tell us a little bit more about Foshan as a city, the city where you're living at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I could go on for a while about Foshan, I think. The interesting thing about Foshan is that when I arrived, it was like in the process almost of being built, like I would say. And if you were to come, 5-10 years before that, there was like nothing here, right? It's like one of those incredible cities in China where if you go back 20 years, 15 years, it wasn't here. It was factories along whether it's a river, the river goes through it. So it was kind of a small port town in a way. And then in the space, like year on year, the place just gets bigger. It's huge now. And the place that I live in now, it's called the financial high-tech zone, right? So it's fancy. But if you were to go, when I arrived 5 years ago, it wasn't even here. It was like, it was just being built. So Foshan has, for me, been this perfect opportunity to see like the thing that you read about China, which is the rapid development and how a patch of land is nothing. 5 years later, it's a city. So I mean, I love it. Like the city of Foshan has a population of just over 7 million, I think, which is almost twice the population of Ireland. That's like my fun fact to tell people at home. It's twice as big as my country, which is just crazy. But it doesn't feel like that. You go to Guangzhou and it's like 14 million, So if you can say that it's a small town, maybe in the context of China, it's a small city. But if you were to go anywhere in the West or Europe, it's huge.
So definitely.
It's nice.
And when you arrived, what was it like on your first day at work going into a kindergarten? What were you expecting from teaching in a kindergarten in China, and what was the actual reality of being there?
Yeah, well, this is a good question. The first thing that I noticed, not even on my first day of teaching, but my first day when I stepped off the plane, was how hot it was. The temperature was completely different. Here in the south, it's sort of a subtropical, humid climate, which is not at all the cold, windy, rainy Ireland I'm from. So that was the first thing. In terms of the kindergarten, I had some experience at home of teaching kids, of that age group. So, and there was kind of summer camps and things that I was involved with as well. So the transition over to kindergarten was pretty smooth, I think. Well, I mean, now I feel like it was smooth. When I started, I thought it was really hard. I thought it was really hard, because you have these kind of expectations of going in and just being like this amazing, kindergarten teacher, but it can actually be tough. What I say to new teachers, because now I'm the manager of the same place, and I say to new staff when they come is that it takes time. It takes time, so you have to kind of be patient with yourself as you kind of grow accustomed to the life and to the work and things. But it's the one thing I can say for sure is it's a happy job, because you're just trying to make kids happy, right? And if they're happy, then you're doing a good job. So yeah, once I got into it, it was a good one.
Definitely. And from having gone out through Opportunity China all the way back in, is it 2015 now? To now, and working as a manager at your school. How did that come about? How did you find your way of sort of getting promoted and sort of working your way up the totem pole, if you like, at the school in China?
Yeah, I pulled a coup, I suppose. No, it was I work in #1 international kindergarten in Foshan City. Just to answer the question, but there was within the first 2 years while I was there. After my first year, they assigned a supervisor to the team. Originally, we were under the management of NHIK, Nanhai International Kindergarten, which is the second larger kindergarten also in Foshan City. So they were kind of directly managing us first year. But as the school grew bigger and more English teachers arrived, we started to need our own sort of management system. So the school promoted one of the other teachers. And then after Daisy, after she left, then I was offered the position. And then I just haven't left. So nobody else has had a chance.
And I suppose when you left and before you arrived in China, what do you really wish you had known that you didn't know?
So much. I was like the worst applicant. I was totally unprepared. Opportunity kind of sent me all the information. Sando and NHK, he sent me all the information. I thought, whatever, I'll be fine. I'll just do it. The weather again was like the one thing that I didn't understand, because there is no sort of humidity in Ireland, right? So I got off the plane and I was wearing a hoodie and I had jeans on and like 28, 30 degree weather with super high humidity. That was awful. I wish that I had checked the temperature more. That's for sure. But I think that a sort of benefit to the way that I did it was that my expectations were almost super low. I was kind of open to whatever happened because I hadn't really thought about what it would be like. So I got here and, I was maybe too far in the other way, and totally ready for whatever came. Temperature was the one thing that threw me, but beyond that, I kind of felt that I was pretty open to just trying it. So I didn't really feel that I needed more beyond maybe a couple more pairs of shorts.
Fantastic. And in terms of where you're living now, how did things work for you in terms of getting an apartment when you got to China? And having been there for 5 years now, have you changed up your living space? How has that worked for you?
Yeah, I wrote this down in my little notebook here to make sure that I brought this up. I'm ready to boast about it. Actually, I've done quite well with apartments. But when I first arrived, the school had school assigned accommodation. So I took one room in an apartment for 3 people. So they offer contracts there's kind of 2 contracts that the school offer. One is with private accommodation and one is with school provided, with a difference of about 1,000 RMB in kind of the take home wage. So I thought, for ease, I would just take school accommodation, which I do advise for anybody who's considering going out. I personally think that you're better off going and taking school accommodation and having a look. And, I stayed in school accommodation then for 6 months, and then a spot opened up in an apartment with some friends. So I moved in there, and that was kind of great. But I think to have, come off the plane and everything be so new and then start looking for apartments, I personally feel kind of adds maybe a little bit of layer of difficulty that you don't need. So I stayed in that apartment then for 4 years. It was really nice. I mean, like a second home, almost, like 4 years. And then in the middle of COVID quarantine, I thought, maybe I was going to have to go home. And I have a dog and stuff and a housemate. So I wanted to find a new apartment because our lease was going to go up in August. And so I kind of wanted to help out. And we started hunting for apartments. And the word is hunting because we looked at so many. And found this massive place. 3 bedroom. I wrote it out. 3 bedrooms, 125 square meters, right? It's massive for 2 people. And it works out at 2,900 RMB, or that's €360, or £330. What? That's crazy. In Dublin, I was paying €450 for a bedroom. I'm still angry about it 5 years later. So the accommodation is like, because the wage relative like to the cost of living for almost, I would say, the contracts, almost all of them, for sure all of them, the wage relative to the cost of living, it's so much higher. So a 3-bedroom apartment for 2,900 is really reasonable, even on a starting year wage. So it's such a steal. Now the downside was that it was totally empty. There was no AC, there was no furniture. It was filthy. But the cost of buying the furniture and buying AC units and fixing all the holes in the walls over the course of the year was still cheaper than the fully furnished 2-bedroom apartment I lived in. It was just such good luck, I feel. Yeah, with apartments, you really do have to kind of look around. It can be pretty hit and miss, which is why I think at the start, having that school provided accommodation and that base that you can go and look when you feel ready to go and look for other apartments, I think is kind of an important one to have.
Sure. And I see Johnny's just popped a question just down there as well. It's actually quite directly related.
Yeah, it is. So Shanghai and number one, would you send in school given accommodation? You changed to private. So okay, this you need to discuss with. So Sando's the manager at NHK and I'm the manager at number one. This is something that you would need to kind of discuss in advance. For the most part, especially with NHK, because it's a much larger school, they kind of always have floating apartments. Whereas in number one, we try to get apartments relative to the number of teachers that we have. So if in the long term you were going to come with the intention of finding your own accommodation, that's maybe something you could kind of say in advance. But if, for example, when I moved, my contract did change from it went up by 1,000 because I lived in my own private accommodation. But that is something that you need to discuss in advance with, whichever school you go to, because it is a change in contract and you'd have to sign a new contract that reflects that. So, with contracts, always best to be careful, always best to kind of communicate that clearly because contracts are there to protect all of us. So double check.
That's a really good point, Joe. And I guess the broader thing for those of you who are going to different schools as well, but might have an option of either going into private accommodation or accommodation that's provided by the school, is to think carefully about which option is going to be best for you. I would tend to agree with Joe on his initial point about accepting provided accommodation when you're going for the first time. It is just that bit easier to set up. It might be, you might nominally lose a bit of money on it, but when you're feeling more comfortable, when you're feeling more confident in your second and third years, then that's the time to go out and explore and be a bit more adventurous in those kind of senses. But I think if you are given the offer of accommodation, the general convention is if you're going for the first time, it's usually a good idea to take that up, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, on that point as well, just in terms of the kind of cost difference for apartments, the school accommodation is 1,000 RMB. You wouldn't really find anywhere that would cost 1,000 RMB. So that's, we kind of say to new teachers when they come out, and even if it's kind of like sometimes we get groups of 2 or 3 people who come, we'd say to really think about how much it will cost kind of long term. That 1,000 RMB is always going to be cheaper than anything you'll pay when you live in private accommodation. So it's about balance. The other thing then that also be mindful is the cost of things like agency fees for signing a new contract. That's what always gets me. It's so expensive. And deposits and things. So, it took me 6 months of living here first to save up enough money to kind of buy in on the deposit and pay the agency fees to still kind of be comfortable. So I do, for sure, I would agree that you're better off trying the school accommodation first, getting into the feel of it. And then when you're feeling confident, be that within the first year or afterwards, kind of look into your own private accommodation from there as well. Also, an advantage as well is that if there's kind of a problem with the apartment and it's school provided accommodation, the school for the most part, speaking from my experience, will kind of offer assistance in repairing that if it's, your water or your AC. Whereas if it's private accommodation, you would have to kind of give the money yourself, or if you could speak Chinese, you have to find the people yourself, which is a little bit tougher. So no, I think that the kind of safest, easiest option is always, stick with school at first.
Sure, for sure. And Joe, could you let us know a little bit more about your experience over the last few months in Foshan with relation to COVID? So what's happened, what's sort of been the situation for you guys at the school, and what's it like now?
Sure. I mean, it was crazy how fast it all started. It was really poor timing in a lot of ways. What happened to us was that so COVID happened just the end of January here. So we had just broken up on the January 22nd for like a 10-day holiday. And the afternoon before we started on the holidays, the school came in and they said, actually, we're going to add, I think it was 7. And we're going to add 3 days. Now it's 10. And then the next day, they were like, actually, we're adding an extra week on that. Now it's 17 days. We were like, this is brilliant. 17 days holidays. Like, that's perfect. This can't go wrong. And people who were still abroad, like, extended their holidays. One teacher spent like a month in Bali in the end because, whatever, she had a month off. And then the borders closed. Like, just out of nowhere, the borders shut. And everybody who was outside China couldn't get back in. I was originally supposed to go to Japan, and my flight left like a week after the holiday started. And then the border to Hong Kong shut, so I couldn't get my flight. So it was only for that. If I had, been able to get on the train, I would have been in Hong Kong and I would have gone to Japan. I'd be stuck outside. So then we lost, oh man, it's crazy, like 8 teachers. Then I was the only one left inside China. Everyone else was gone, which is a nightmare. So then we just had to wait. February, March, April was just waiting. And then May, there was kind of rumor that we'd maybe be starting back. And two new teachers arrived just before the borders closed in March. So I was kind of, looking after them. And then we started back in June. It was actually pretty grim. To be honest, like, it wasn't, sometimes it was fun. Sometimes it was great, because you'd sleep all day and just play PS4, and that was like the dream. And then some days I was pretty convinced it was the end of the world. So it's like, where's the balance? The problem for me was that I can't cook. I had no food in the house. And also that time of year, anyway, Spring Festival, a lot of the kind of big supermarkets and stuff would close because it's a national holiday, people go home. So it was always hard to get food anyway. And the only place that I could get food, the only place that was consistently delivering food was McDonald's, right? McDonald's takeaway. So just like, there was 1 week in between when the supermarkets had closed and when they opened again, there was like a week where you just couldn't kind of get fresh food almost. I was just like living off McDonald's, which is great because I had an excuse to eat McDonald's for a week. But I gained like, I don't know, so much weight. So that was pretty good. But by June then, in May, things here in Foshan were, really calming down and it was fine. And then because the kindergarten is, such young children, they'd obviously be at kind of high risk. We were the last group to open once the school started back. So we started back then in June. And then his life was normal then.
So is life just pretty much normal on the street then now? Are people sort of just doing things as they would before COVID at the moment, I guess?
Yeah. When it was in the middle of COVID, it was pretty intense. Like, nobody really wanted to go outside. It wasn't here. Things were pretty chill. Like, because I have the dog. If I wanted to go and walk the dog, I could. But, you kind of felt like you shouldn't, So there was kind of that reluctance. But then after a time, yeah, things just started to get back to normal. So now here, some people are wearing masks. Some people aren't wearing masks. It's kind of personal choice. There hasn't been a case in Foshan in a recent memory, I suppose. I can't remember the last one, but it's been a long time. And
been a case in China for 30 days now so far.
Well, I think that might have changed. There was something on the borders, but yeah, I mean, it's like 1, 2, 3 kind of things. Like, it's, single digits, so it's fine. The most recent kind of moment where I felt it is I went to see that that new movie. What is it? What is it? Tenet. I went to see Tenet. Sorry, I went to see Tenet right in the cinema, and there was like a group of us, and you kind of had to sit far apart, and it was 30% capacity, so it was kind of empty. And that was maybe a moment where I was like, right, there are still restrictions, but other than the cinema, honestly, it's fine. It's back to normal, which is great.
That's really good. I guess moving on to sort of like a kind of happier subject, over the last few years, obviously, discounting the last few months, where have you had the opportunity to travel to? Where have been your favourite places to go? What have you been doing so far as that sort of thing's concerned?
Yeah, I mean, that's almost a tough question. It's been 5 years, right? And the contracts, when you have a look, you'll see there is a lot of holidays. So I've had a chance to go to a lot of places. I feel like I've been to, I don't know, you can't even say most places, right? Because China is huge. And there are so many places in China. I think in 5 years, I haven't even done everything I would like to. I haven't been to Japan. That's like next on the list. But almost, I feel like if you were to suggest somewhere, maybe I've kind of been lucky enough to have the chance to go there. Last year, maybe a better example, there was 2 teachers who came and they were like militant about it. They were so planned. They sat in day one and they said, what are the holidays? When are the public holidays? And they wrote it down on the little calendar. And, you know, they were like, okay, in 3 months, we're going to want a day off. And they kind of planned it out, and they did it everywhere. All of the big cities in China, and they went abroad, like Japan and Korea and stuff as well, all in the space of a year. So for me, I feel like I've almost gotten lazy with it. Like, I've been here for so long, Chengdu, right, to see the pandas. I still haven't done that. And I keep saying, well, you know, I'll take a day off, I'll go up for a weekend or something, because it's, you know, 2-hour flight or something, it's fine. And I just haven't. So for my tip for new people, if you're coming out, is a year is a long time, absolutely. But, you know, make good use of your weekends and make a list of places you want to go and go there, because you do have enough time. Once you're in here and there are flights, I could fly to Chengdu tomorrow if I felt like it. I won't because I'm too lazy, but I could. So write a list and think about it and you know, plan it that way, because you have opportunity. The travel is something that I really feel grateful for. At home, like I'd been to the UK a couple of times. I've been on like a family holiday to France, like stayed in a caravan. And other than that, I hadn't traveled at all. So that's something that I am definitely grateful for. I really do feel like I've, you know, colored in that map. So.
Awesome. Great. Well, I'll throw it out for anyone who's got any questions for Joe just at the moment as well. Feel free just to unmute yourselves and ask any questions that you might have.
Yeah. That's great.
Or you can just type them in there as well.
When you first went over, did you ever feel homesick? And when you did, what did you sort of do to deal with it?
Right. This is a great question. At first, I think I was fine. Maybe 3 months, I'd say I was fine, because everything was so new. Everything was so different. You turn a corner and it was something else. You never eat the same food twice. You know, it's a lot. And it was only maybe after 3 months when I really started to kind of settle into the pace of life here, did I start thinking about other stuff. Yeah, I did get homesick. But luckily for me, there was an Irish bar that served like real Irish food. Like it's an actual Irish person owned it. So it's legit. And I could just go there and like order, you know, shepherd's pie or whatever, and it was fine. So that's, I mean, you know, it's quite rare that you'd find Irish people, or let alone an authentic Irish bar anywhere. So to have one in Foshan, I was quite lucky. But I know for example, people from the UK, there's a lot of British expats here, and there are a lot of British owned sort of restaurants and businesses and stuff. Somebody just opened, I'm excited to share, somebody just opened a business where they're selling sausage rolls over WeChat, which I've ordered like a ton of, right? Because like Greg's, it's like as close as you get to Greg's. So you do get homesick, but there are little ways that you can sort of try and fight it, you know, or little pieces of home that you can find. For things like food, right? Because that's like the easy one. It's so hard to find exactly the thing from home, but there's enough things that are, you know, home adjacent, that if you kind of close your eyes and think of home, maybe it tastes the same. So you kind of just have to take it that way, I think.
Anyone else?
What have been your favourite bits and the most challenging bits of just working with the children and trying to teach them English while you've been in China?
Great. This is a great question. The best bit is seeing how fast they grow. They're at that like perfect age. It's like, it's a bad comparison, but like a puppy, right? They're at that point where a puppy is so small and cute and amazing, but it grows so quickly, you know, and the kids, it's again, a poor comparison, but it's the same thing. They grow so fast. And if you were to come for a year, you know, you're seeing these kids 5 days a week, every week for a year. So you'll see the difference, even in sort of your own pictures from when you started and when they finish. And when you're with them every day, just talking, they'll sort of, you know, through the environment, pick up more English. So you'll sort of notice it. That's the best moment, is seeing them grow up. And when they're able to start to communicate with you, that's a good one. The challenging part is is trying to keep, 24 kids listening or 24 kids focused. That takes time. That takes time for sure, and a bit of planning. So that was the most challenging part of the set was, 24 3-year-olds looking at you. And the best part was watching those 24 3-year-olds have fun. So cliche, but it's true.
How good is your Chinese?
That depends how much Chinese you can speak. If you don't speak any Chinese, I'm fluent. And if you have any Chinese, it's pretty okay. Something that we do suggest to kind of new teachers when they come out, the school itself doesn't hire any, Chinese teachers to teach the foreign teachers. I know that some schools have that, but we don't. But we do have like a list of people that we could suggest. And then there are things called the HSKs, right, which are the standardized Chinese exams. Now I'm getting ready for my HSK 4, which, again, I think is great, but is maybe pretty average. But in the space of a year, like, you could easily do a HSK 1 for sure, a HSK 2, absolutely. The 2 teachers that joined our team in March, although they did have March, April, May, they had 3 months of time to just study, but they're getting ready to do their HSK 2 exams in October. So March to October, they're kind of getting ready. I think that if you have the interest, if you have the time, it's worth trying those HSKs because it's a qualification you can go home with and say, I went to China for a year and look, I can speak Chinese as long as you can't.
I think one thing I might ask, having been there for 5 years now and sort of having, like I mentioned earlier, kind of gone up the ladder, if you like. What sort of tips would you have for people who wanted to go to China to teach, but actually kind of wanted to progress themselves within the organization they're working in? So wanted to kind of get a bit of career progression whilst they were there, as opposed to just going there for a year and teaching and coming back.
Right. That's something that I had in mind. To be honest, it's something I had in mind toward the end of my first year. I decided that, when I decided I was going to stay, I decided I wanted something that I could put on my CV, right? To kind of justify, year 3, I was like, I need to be a manager. I've been here too long. I need something. But it's such a simple tip, right? But it's something as simple as saying hello to everybody that you pass in the halls, or always kind of being the, not the loudest, but having the brightest attitude or the sort of friendliest face. Because so much of China or so much of Chinese management, we'll say, is based on perceptions of attitude, And so if the kind of higher uppers are looking at and saying, this person is at least giving the impression of having a good attitude, they'll want to spend more time with you. And then once you sort of get in there a little bit, it kind of progresses. In number 1 and HK, the way it works is that, a teacher comes and they do the first year. And in the second year, they have a training teacher position, which is a kind of a paid promotion. And so in my first year, I was just regular teacher, and in the second year, I was a training teacher. So I kind of had already started at that point. And then smiling, saying hello, offering help, that kind of thing. And then for me as well, because I started to learn Chinese, I started to communicate in the sort of office space more and more in Chinese. And that's, for me, the kind of jump then from, training teacher to manager was honestly in a large part because I do now mostly speak Chinese. Sort of my administrative role is mostly in Chinese anyway. And so that's what makes it easier because the bosses usually don't speak English. The important people don't speak English. They pay people to speak English for them.
That's really quite interesting about sort of the attitude with things. What's the situation where you've kind of, I don't know, maybe had something awkward happen at work and had to overcome it? Something sort of cross-culturally difficult that you've had to manage?
Yeah, for me, something that, as my Chinese got better and better, conversely, the amount of awkward situations I found myself in got, more and more. The more I tried to speak to people in Chinese, the more often it went wrong. So there's so many times, the worst one, and this is purely management. This wasn't kind of teaching, but it was in a meeting discussing Christmas and the Christmas holidays and how many it was going to be. And, they had said that it was going to be 3 half days. So 3 kind of mornings or afternoon you could pick over Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Christmas. And I totally misheard. And I heard them say, 3 days off. So I was like, that's fantastic. 4 days total. And I went back and I told my team, it's 4 days off, like go on holidays. So they all booked their flights and things. And then it was coming up to Christmas and I realized that everyone was leaving and I had to go back to the school management and say, look, I'm sorry, but I've just given everyone a week off. They booked their flights, like there's nothing we could do. And that's now I asked them to put it in writing. Anything important. So that's, there's been so many instances where language, like the more that you try, I mean, you still have to try, right? I mean, that's the same in any language. The more that you try, these things will happen. I went to Beijing, for example, and I if you ask me, I could have sworn I was fluent. I was convinced I was fluent. And I went to Beijing and I kind of stepped into the airport and I was with my friend who spoke zero Chinese. And I went up to this sort of help desk and I said to them like, hi, in, again, fluent Mandarin. I said, hi, where's the nearest metro station? And she replied then and she's like, I'm sorry, I don't speak English. I said, oh my God. It's been years, she thought I was speaking English, but she said it in Mandarin and my friend was like, oh, what did she say? And I was like, oh yeah, she said it's over there. Let's
That's an interesting thing. A big difference between southern and northern China. As those of you who were in the Mandarin lessons that we had a few weeks ago,
nice.
teacher Zhang was mentioning a little bit. Sometimes the dialects can be so different that when you go from one to the other, it can be hard to understand. I mean, if you and I spoke Chinese to each other, we probably wouldn't understand each other because you're a southern Uyghur and I'm a northern Uyghur, and so yeah.
Not at all. Yeah, that's true for sure. If Mandarin is maybe something, if you're traveling to China with the intention of studying Mandarin, for example, then maybe you are kind of better off moving sort of north or closer to Beijing because they have sort of what's considered more standard Mandarin. Whereas down south, we're kind of cowboys down here. We speak, I would say Cantonese influenced Mandarin. So you can maybe learn some Cantonese. That could be interesting, but yeah.
It's probably important to mention as well, Shenzhen, those of you who are going to Shenzhen, that's actually a bit of an outlier to the south of China because in Shenzhen, they say no one is from Shenzhen. Everyone in Shenzhen is from another part of China. So whereas Foshan, where Joe lives, is not too far from Shenzhen in the south, you'll find a lot more regional dialects, a lot more different accents, dialects, even language pervasively used. Whereas in Shenzhen, you'll actually find it's pretty standard Mandarin. It's almost spoken as it would be in Beijing because everyone's from all these different places will converge together. That's really interesting there.
Shenzhen is so good, actually. Not to spend too, I can't talk with any sort of expertise on Shenzhen, but I went there last year, before all this nonsense. And I was saying at the start about how Foshan was a city that was nothing 10 years ago. It's the same with Shenzhen, but developed to such an extreme. It's like, it's so high tech. For me, when I was there, it's still Chinese. It's a Chinese city for sure, but I kind of got almost like Singapore vibes from it, like personally. Yeah, if I wasn't, I'm based in Foshan, but yeah, Shenzhen. Nice. That's cool.
Awesome. Does anyone have any final questions for us just before we wrap up today? Oh.
I think you muted.
I have a question. It's been put to me privately though, so I don't think you guys can see it. Which has come from Charlotte, which I think Johnny might be trying to talk as well.
Great, 2 questions, lovely.
Or maybe not. Okay, well, I'll put out the first question from Charlotte. So what's expat life like where you are?
Nice. In Foshan, the expat community is smaller than maybe that of Guangzhou, but it's definitely really active. I think people here almost try and make up for the fact that there aren't so many by, really regularly having activities. There's a couple of years ago, some people got together and they made a group called the Foshan Friendlies is what it's called, and it's like a 500 strong group of expats in Foshan, which is still quite a small city, and they all go to the same bars and they eat at the same restaurants, and they do. A week ago, there was a Mexican sort of a Mexican restaurant pop-up thing, which is so good. Mexican food, right? There's no Mexican food here in Foshan. That's it. I'm being honest. You have to go to Guangzhou, so it's terrible. But it popped up and it was there, and everybody went there. And it's that kind of thing where if you become a part of that group, you sort of know everybody. So it's smaller, but it's maybe friendlier, right? It's the name, right? Get it? Foshan Friendlies. It's clever. So it's nice. It's good.
Awesome. And anyone else have any questions for us just before we finish off? No? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, those of you who were able to join us. Again, so sorry for the delay in getting this out and everything messing around. Like I say, when you're going over to China, sometimes doing something that takes a lot of bandwidth, like live streaming, can be a little problematic when it's going over VPNs and several different networks. But we shall make sure in the future that that I guess we do everything as simply as we can, and over Zoom I think is probably the best option going forward as opposed to YouTube. But thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining us. I've had this recorded, so I'll pop this up on our YouTube as well, so everyone can watch it again if you want to, if you missed the start. Thank you so much, Joe. That's really helpful. Thank you for joining us. And take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Yeah, be safe. Bye, everyone.